5 things 97% of game developers are doing wrong, and what you can do to fix it. Almost all game developers are making these 5 mistakes, and today I'll show you how you can stop repeating those same mistakes over and over and over and over and over. Mistake number 1, planning. If you ever wanted to pitch a game to a game studio, then there's one thing you'll need, and it's called a game design document. A game design document tells other people, and you also, what your game is about and how long it'll take to make, what devices you'll be designing for your game for, and you can even include some screenshots of what you want the game to look like, or even images of other games whose art style you're going to straight up copy. Even if you don't want to pitch your game to a studio, you'll still need a game design document. It helps you plan out your game, so you're not wandering around blindlessly. And trust me, I know from experience that planning is key. If you don't plan out your game, you won't know which parts to focus on first. You'll be wandering around aimlessly, trying to code parts of your game, designing features that you didn't even know you were going to make until you started, creating an endless slew of nonsensical content, and all to delete it the next day when you realize you weren't even supposed to be working on that part yet. And that segues me to the next point. Mistake number 2. Don't focus on art first. Whoa, the new Fortnite season looks amazing. When I'm making my game, I want mine to look just like it. That's the attitude of the average game designer. And trust me, when you look at other games, you'll feel jealous that they have a huge team of artists and you're stuck with your lousy self. It takes a huge team of artists months to create realistic looking textures and models for AAA games. Believe me, you can't compete with that. You're a single person coding and doing the art for your game. If you focus on creating the art for your game first, then you'll be stuck in an infinite loop of trying to perfect the art, putting it in the game and saying, I could draw this better, and then repeating it all over again. You won't ever finish the game if you start drawing before you have actual basis to start from. Use basic shapes like squares and circles if you're making a 2D game, and cubes and beans if you're making a 3D one. If you have an enemy and the player and they're the same shape, then make the enemy and the player a different color so you can tell them apart. Once you get all the core mechanics down, like building if you're making a Minecraft ripoff, shooting if you're making the next Call of Duty, or not showering in 35 years of League of Legends, then you can perfect the art for the game. Indie games usually have a cartoon or pixely art style because it's easier for a small team of artists to make. Remember, the art style doesn't have to be realistic to make the game good. Take a look at Minecraft. Yeah, it looks like absolute garbage, but it's also one of the most popular games. Graphics don't matter that much in the game design. It's the core mechanics of a game that make it fun to play. Take a look at Among Us. Whoever did the art really didn't know how to draw, or they did but were too lazy, and millions of people still enjoyed it. The graphics contributed to the goofy gameplay of Among Us. Mistake number 3. Get a core mechanic. No, not the one that fixes your car. A core mechanic is the base of a video game. In Fortnite, the main mechanics are building and shooting. In Among Us, it's killing people. And in League of Legends, it's not touching grass. Make sure not to have too much core mechanics or the player will be overwhelmed. The reason that some games fail is because they just have too many mechanics. Find one thing that the players will find fun. For example, in cookie clicker games, it's just clicking a cookie. Just clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. Make sure to shake up the game now and then. Don't change the mechanic completely, but have a different way to complete the mechanic. In Minecraft, you can craft things differently if you don't have the correct materials. In some shooter games, you can eliminate opponents, even if you don't have a weapon. This sort of switching back and forth delays or even prevents the player from getting bored. If you kept the player doing the same thing for some time, they are sure to get bored, so don't let them. In multiplayer, it's easy for the player to get excited, because each player that they fight is different. This makes for easy content as the players fight themselves. But in single player games, that's a lot harder, as you have to make the world seem as lifelike as possible, having a bunch of interactions, whether it's through NPCs, enemies, or power-ups, so the player doesn't get tired of the same thing over and over again. If you have weapons in your game, then make them spawn randomly so the player doesn't know what to expect when he or she opens up a loot drop or a chest. But don't make it too random, as that'll make the game less skill-based, and most players don't like that. It's a careful balance that us game developers are teetering on, making sure our game doesn't tip this way or that. It's a pretty stressful job of making sure that your game isn't too frustrating, requires at least some skill, and has at least some randomness. Mistake number 4. Get juice. No, not the thing you drink. Game juice is a concept where you make your game as satisfying as possible. That means adding things like particle systems, bassy sound effects, is that even a word? And screen shakes. Try to make your core mechanic or mechanics satisfying. In Minecraft, mining is satisfying because of the sound effect and animation of the pickaxe. In Fortnite, shooting is satisfying because of the sound effect and the recoil animation. In League of Legends, touching grass is satisfying because the players are doing it in the game and not in actual life. In my Scratch game Space, for example, pressing space is satisfying because I put the particle effects and a screen shake every beat drop, and also it's synced along to the music. In my other game, Airplane, shooting enemies is incredibly satisfying because of the explosion particle and the sound effects.
It's really bassy.
If you juice up the main mechanic of the game, then the player will be actually excited to do it. Now, let's take a look at this trash game with absolute no juice at all. This is a cookie clicker, one of the hundreds of thousands of cookie clickers on Scratch, and there's absolutely nothing special about it. In fact, the game is boring 5 seconds into it. Nothing particularly exciting happened when I click on the cookie. I don't have any tactical feedback. Tactile feedback is very important for a player. Would you rather click on a cookie that does nothing, or click on a cookie that bursts with explosions and particles and noise every single climb? The answer is obvious. The cookie clicker genre of games is quite boring as it is. You don't really gain anything from playing it except extra points. But that doesn't do anything for you. This leads us onto my next point. Mistake number 5. Make it challenging. No one wants to spend their time and energy on something and get absolutely nothing out of it. More than anything, your game has to be fun to play. That means at the end of the day, the player has to win. Your game has to be challenging, but beatable. The balance of challenge and reward gives the player a sense of accomplishment when the game is over. The best example of this is in the game League of Legends, a multiplayer game. It's notoriously known for making their player base a bunch of non-grass touching nerds, but even I have to admit, it is satisfying to win the game. Not that I've played or anything. I actually haven't. I go outside. I'm not a nerd. Trying to balance all of these tips and incorporate them into a single game is a difficult task, but it isn't impossible. That's our job as game developers. It's important to focus on what makes your game unique before you do anything. You want to stand out in the waves of unoriginal, mindless games. Then you can slowly dial in the difficulty, the juiciness, in designing your game to be more challenging, but not impossible, and making the player feel good about playing your game. So those are the 5 tips that will make you game developers better at making games. Make sure to avoid those 5 mistakes when creating your games. And if you play League of Legends, leave a comment in the comments and I'll roast you with 2 words. Go touch grass. That's 3, but okay, touch grass. Thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like it, and then subscribe and turn on notifications. I will see you in another video.